Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, an introduction to the Children's Code, with myself, Kelly, and Regina here. We'll do a few introductions in a moment. Can I just check that you can hear us? Okay, if you could just use the chat box, which you should be able to see in the right-hand side, and just type yes or no, that'd be superb.
And I'll just check that you can also hear me.
Perfect. Cool.
Great.
So the other thing is this is being recorded as well, so you can always refer back to it afterwards. It will be available on our YouTube channel as well as being on our website. Now, we're likely to be talking for the next 35 to 40 minutes because we've got quite a lot to cover. We're splitting it into two sections. So I'm going to talk for the first half and I'm going to hand over to Regina. If at any point there are any questions, please do use the chat box to ask us those and we'll try and answer them as we go. And I hope you find this useful. So let's kick off with a little bit of a who are we? So I'm Kellie Peters. I'm a co-founder of Databasix. And Regina, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Yep, I'm the other half of Databasix. We set the company up together after working for many years together in the NHS, and so we've got quite a lot of experience with data protection and information governance. So that's where our background is from, and we've been running Databasix for about nearly 8 years now.
Yeah. So we are, like I said, a little bit passionate about data protection. Indeed. And hopefully what we're able to do today is provide a practical insight into this code. So let's start off with some interesting facts because, you know, I'm a data nerd. I always like a few facts to kind of kick off any session. So I was looking at the Information Commissioner's website to kind of get an insight in terms of children and access to the internet and what was really triggering this code. And what their infographic says on the ICO website is 1 in 5 internet users are children. 82% of 5 to 7-year-olds have access to the internet and spend 6 to 7 hours online a week, which I thought was quite staggering. It then, not surprisingly, increases to 96% of 8 to 11-year-olds. On average, they have almost 9 hours a week online, and 18% have an active social media presence. And then we go on to the 12 to 15-year-olds, and 99% of 12 to 15-year-olds have access to the internet. They spend approximately 17 hours a week online, and 67% have an active social media presence, which is actually quite staggering, but not surprising. So the Information Commissioner has a responsibility to introduce a number of codes of practice, one of which is age-appropriate design. And that's really not surprising when you look at these kind of statistics, why it's incredibly important that we consider protecting children. And I'll define what a child is in a moment. But some of the risks that we need to be aware of that I'm sure you, our listeners, are aware of is that, you know, young children or anyone under the age of 18, certainly the younger of the group, could be sharing personal information with predatory adults who are pretending to be children. It is about that they could be being exposed to bullying or harassment through email, instant messaging, or online forums. And because children, well, some children certainly want to defy adult rule, could be deliberately accessing illegal or inappropriate content. If you want more information about that, I can send you the link to the infographic that the ICO has. So there's no surprise that then this code is being introduced. So what is the Children's Code? So the Children's Code is heavily rooted in the child's right to privacy. So you're familiar with the fact that as individuals, we all have the right to privacy. It's a human right. It's not just something that is enshrined in data protection, but certainly the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children recognises that there has to be special safeguards in place when we are talking about children. And obviously data protection, both at a UK and a European level, reflects this in the various safeguards that are in place. Now, we've left the European Union, so the code that I'm talking about only applies to UK domestic law. The important thing is, if you are a company outside of the UK and you are offering services and goods, free or otherwise, to UK children, the code applies to you. But I'm going to dig into a little bit more detail about that as we crack on. So just to give you a bit of a timeline, I suppose the question is first to those of you that are on the webinar, had you heard of either the children's code or age appropriate design before today's webinar or being invited to today's webinar? I'll just see if anyone answers. Okay. Yes, that's what I did think. I am not sure how widely known it is that this code exists, so that's not a surprising response. So the code on the 11th of June last year, the code was actually the Secretary of State laid the age appropriate design code to Parliament under section 125 1B of the Data Protection Act of 2018, which is the UK domestic data protection law. It was then the ICO issued the code on the 12th of August last year, and it came into effect from the 2nd of September 2020. And the key is we've had 12 months to have a transition to get ourselves operational and ready by the 1st of September 2021. So we really only have 3 months to be in a position that all of us on this webinar or anyone listening to this webinar puts in place the necessary steps. It obviously doesn't help if you're not aware of it. Now, the key to remember, because it is has been put into to law, there can be penalties for non-compliance, but I'm not going to focus too much on the penalties because there was a lot of scaremongering, as you may recall, when we introduced the GDPR. But the keys I want you to take away from today is that it is a statutory code of practice for children's privacy when they are online, and the code has 15 standards that organisations need to meet, and Regina's going to talk us through what those codes are as we go along. It is a meaty document, I have to say. If you want to download it, and I can send you a link afterwards, it is 113 pages, this code, so it's not a quick read, but we're going to focus on what we think are the priorities for you. So you might be thinking, what's the definition of a child? Or that might just be me, that's just me being nerdy potentially, but it's quite important. So the code defines a child as anyone under the age of 18. So not just talking about primary school children, we are talking all the way up to an 18-year-old. Now, obviously, this is very different when we're talking about consent. So we need to separate out the two definitions. So consent of a child in this country is 13. The definition of a child when it comes to the children code and accessing information society services is 18. So the first question we are really going to be having to ask ourselves is, do we as organisations offer goods and services that could be of interest to an 18-year-old online or younger? So it's a key question to consider. And you might be asking yourself, well, Kelly, what do you actually mean by information society services? It's quite an interesting title. What do we actually mean by that, and what do we actually apply to that? So I've given some ideas on this slide. So it's any apps. It's not surprising that's on there. Lots of children today have access to apps. It does include websites, social media platforms, TikTok, LinkedIn. Although LinkedIn may appeal to under 18s and maybe 16 to 18-year-olds, but you've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and probably many more that I'm too old to even know exist. Online messaging, online marketplaces where children are able to purchase goods and services, content streaming services such as YouTube, connected toys, because in today's day and age, we connect a lot of things in terms of the internet of things. But I'm going to read directly from what the code says, just so I can be clear. And I apologize if this sounds a little bit, I'm telling you to suck eggs and stuff, but what the code actually says is that essentially an information society service means most online services. This includes apps, programs, and many websites, including search engines, social media platforms, online messaging, and internet-based voice telephony services, online marketplaces, content streaming such as video, music, or gaming services, online games, news, or educational websites, and any websites offering goods or services to users over the internet. And then finally, electronic services for controlling connected toys and other connected devices. So actually, when you consider that, it's quite wide ranging. So the reality is you probably do, you probably are offering something. If you're in an educational facility, for example, or you're a charity, potentially working with young adults. But it also doesn't matter if your service is free. So it's not just thinking, oh, well, actually what we offer a free app, for example, or we offer a free messaging service, or we have access to free materials. Doesn't matter. If it's free and it's appealing to an under 18-year-old, you are covered by this. And also, not-for-profit apps and educational sites are in scope. And just to add to that, if you're a small business selling products online or offering an online-only service via a website, you are in scope. So I think the short answer is you're likely to be in scope for this. So, let's dig a little bit more deeper into that. So who does it apply to? Any organisation that offers goods and services to under 18s. So a question for you will be, is that you? And organisations, information society services that are likely to be accessed by an 18-year-old. So note here, geography doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter where in the world you are. If you fit that criteria, for us, then you will have to apply to the code.
I think the other thing just to add in there is that it doesn't matter if you are specifically targeting under 18s. If you feel that you're not targeting them, you have to think about that likelihood of an under 18-year-old being potentially interested in your services, and then thinking about what level or what age that's likely to go down to. So just because you're not targeting them doesn't mean they're not going to be interested.
Absolutely. Which links nicely on to the next slide, because I think that's going to be a common question, is what does likely to be accessed by a child actually mean? So these are some of the questions that you can take away and think amongst your teams. For example, is the possibility of this happening more probable than not? So is it possible that an under 18-year-old is likely to access your website or your information service or your app? Is the nature and the content of the service appealing to children, even if it's not intended, like Regina said, even if your intention is not to target children, but it could be appealing? Remember, I said at the beginning that children are sometimes tempted to access websites that we don't necessarily think will be appealing to them, but to them they're doing something that might be inappropriate, or they might just be being nosy, for example. And do you have measures in place to prevent children from gaining access even to adult-only services? So do you, have any kind of gateway on your website or your app that says, tell me what your age is before we let you go any further and stuff? So really think about, is your website, your app, or your service appealing to an under 18 year old? I've done quite a lot of talking for the last 15 minutes, so I'm going to let Regina talk you through what are the standards and some more things to consider. Regina.
Excellent, thank you. So yeah, building on then the kind of things you need to be thinking about. So having identified the fact that you need to review your services because of the fact children may access them, there's 15 standards that you need to apply and put into practice. They are the standards of age appropriate design. So this is the idea that you're designing these elements into the service from the start. Obviously, if you've already got existing services, you'll need to see how you can amend them to ensure that they are designed in accordingly. But for anything new that you might be thinking of doing, it's really important to think about all of these elements from the start of your service or product delivery design, and then ensure it's all factored into future upgrades and updates of that service. It's no good having everything brilliant at the start, and then as things get added on and amended and plugged in, that suddenly that's then adding in elements around geolocation or tracking of the child that potentially at the start you knew were not in place. So just having a little look through those, it kicks off with the best interest of the child, which I'll talk about in a little bit more. And then you can look and see that there's some elements that you need to be doing anyway as part of your overarching data protection responsibilities, and really it's factoring those in and ensuring that they're absolutely done. So something like a data protection impact assessment, you would be or should be considering doing one of those where it's involving children anyway, because they are deemed to be more vulnerable users, so it's higher risk data. So again, thinking about those processes you have in place. Looking at then the things like default settings, the idea is about having high privacy from the very outset. I mean, personally, when you look at it, it's almost like the kind of like golden how we'd all love our data to be treated. It's very much, at the point that the child is accessing your services, the default is that their privacy is given the highest protection, and that they don't have to do anything to ensure that their privacy is protected, so that you have your settings set to default with no tracking, no public demonstration of where the child is through geolocation or tracking and things like that. It's then also ensuring that if you are going to look to change those settings, so if you give the child the opportunity to choose a different setting, that the correct and clear guidance and information is given to the child about what that means for their data in terms that they understand. So for older children, sort of maybe 16 plus, 14 plus, depending on the maturity of the child, that's likely to be easier to explain than a child who might be 5, 7, 10 and may find some of the concepts around data sharing and what the implications actually are difficult to understand, or not really fully understand the implication. So you then have that challenge of thinking through the different ages that might be accessing your information. So transparency there is key, and again thinking about your privacy notice, that should be in place, but again it's how accessible is it. Detrimental use of data is thinking and ensuring that the way in which data is collected and used isn't going to cause any harm to the child's well-being, and so being sure that you've thought about that and that there's no potential for harm to the child. Things around how community standards are enforced to protect children, particularly where you might have adults and children mixing, is going to be really important. Again, this might be things that if you're already offering online services to children that you think about, but it's now being brought into the code to ensure that all businesses and organisations and charities are thinking about this, where they may be engaging with children online. Again, some of in the second half, some of these are clearly linked to core data protection principles around only collecting what you need to collect in data minimization, and thinking very carefully about how data is shared with other individuals, that there's a justification for it and that it's not shared inappropriately or with people who don't need to see what's happening around that child. With parental controls, it's being sure that the child is clear that there are parental controls in place and that they could be being monitored, that their use is being monitored. So it's not simply about having them there to protect the child. It's more about ensuring that the child has the awareness that their parents may well be looking at and understanding what that they're doing online. And particularly that's obviously going to be potentially more important as the child gets older and there's that transition from childhood into adulthood. They may feel more restricted or that it is an infringement of their privacy if they know that their parents are watching what they're doing. And so that's probably where that becomes a little bit more contentious. With geolocation, it's very much about the settings being set to default, again, high privacy, that the child is not their location isn't being disclosed automatically, that if they choose to disclose it, that then you're very much making it clear about how and what implication that might have. Profiling of children and the use of that profiling needs to be very carefully considered and why you're doing it. Similarly with nudge techniques, the idea that you shouldn't be using nudge techniques, which are often used with apps, particularly to try and encourage people playing or engaging with the app to spend a bit more, or in some cases it may be to divulge more information, particularly if data is the key driver for that particular app. So trying to through simple things such as language, nudge the child to disclose more about themselves, get access to this amazing set of great information, or by telling us, giving us your email address so we can email you, bigging it up in that way. It needs to be much simpler than that, so that you're not trying through persuasive language to nudge people and the children down a certain route of disclosing more information than they maybe otherwise would. Obviously, in terms of how connected toys and devices are set up and ensuring that security and, again, the information that's made available as part of those, and online tools being available for them to control their privacy settings. So looking at what the best interests of the child refers to, because again, you can kind of consider, well, what does that actually mean? It needs to be a primary consideration, and I imagine it's no accident that this is the first listed in the list of standards that you need to adhere to. And you need to be thinking about it again from the outset. So when you are developing those online services that are going to be accessed by children or could be accessed by children, that actually thinking about what are the interests of the child, how do we protect them? There's a phrase that they use, that children are going to interact with the world online. They are going to use the internet. The figures that Kellie set out at the beginning of the session very much show just how much children are using devices, internet, and online technology. It's part of life, and they're very, very adept at it. And I think the concept of this whole code is very much about protecting the child while they're using and engaging with an online world, not protecting them from it by restricting access. Obviously, it's appropriate in some cases for adult-only content that's inappropriate for a child to access, putting measures in place to restrict access. But for the large proportion of what we're talking about here, it's very much around protecting the child whilst they're interacting with the world online, rather than keeping them away from it. The GDPR is very clear that the children need that specific protection, and they're less likely to be able to understand fully the risks of disclosure. And so, there's that responsibility to keep them safe. And in terms of the idea of the different factors that you need to consider, it's things around, a child needs to feel safe, their health should be protected, their well-being, family relationships, and that psychological and physical development is really important, particularly again in early years, and thinking about how the ways in which children interact online can impact on those elements of the child's development and their growth as they become adults is is paramount. And I think it's something that's obviously challenging as, you know, the world around us has changed so much. And so really you have to think about it from individual child's perspective, what is best for each and every child. And that potentially can be quite challenging for an organisation, particularly if, you know, you started from the point of, well, I don't really think that my organisation or what we offer is going to be that interesting to children. But for the large part, it's something that we'll all have to consider. So on that, it's then thinking about what are the issues that you should be looking at as you're reflecting upon where you may need to make changes in what's already in place, or as you develop future products, services online that may be accessed by children. So have a think about, you know, we've talked about what are the age groups that could be interested in your services, even if you're not targeting them. So, you know, I sort of use us as an example. We offer our training online around data protection. It could be that if you've got, I'd say, you know, 16 to 18-year-olds at college doing business, they may well think, you know what, that could be really good for me. You know, they may find this webinar or some of the other webinars that we've done interesting. And, you know, we don't charge for these webinars, they're free, but they could be of interest. So we then, you know, are going through the process of reviewing all the things that we've talked about in terms of who, you know, how do we make sure that our privacy policy is child friendly? How do we make sure that all the privacy settings are set to a point that's appropriate for children underage? And then you start thinking, well, how low could that go? You know, what's the likelihood of a under 16-year-old, so 13 to 16, you know, under 13, what's the cutoff point for us to be mindful of and be prepared for children accessing the services that we offer? And so, you know, the issues for you to consider are very similar. You know, where is that line? You know, we're not specifically targeting children, but there is the likelihood, I would say, that they could access the services that we offer online. And so we need to be able to adapt and ensure that we are compliant with this code.
And the ICO also state that if in the first instance you say that it's unlikely, but then evidence over the next 6 to 12 months actually demonstrates the code the visitors to your website or to your services or using your apps are actually 18-year-olds, you then need to apply the code to you. So whilst initially your reaction might be, or your note maybe actually this doesn't apply to us, when you go back and review the evidence and it suggests it does, you do then need to factor in the requirements of the code.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as you know, we'd always say it's important that if you do the review of your own services and you feel that children are unlikely to access them, document your rationale for why, in case you are challenged on that. Even if it's based on data that you have from visitors, if it's based on your own perception, document the rationale as to why you believe the code doesn't apply to you, so that, again, you can review it regularly. I'd say 6 months to a year. Obviously, if you do anything new in the meantime, that should then automatically instigate a review to be done. But also, if you are then challenged, you've got that documentary evidence and it shows that you thought about it and not just not bothered. And that's, you know, with the accountability principle, that's obviously key. Have a look at your transparency. So have a think about your privacy policy. You know, would a child understand that privacy notice? And I think there's been a few articles done over, you know, the years since GDPR was introduced, and the level of reading expertise that you need to have to be able to read some of the privacy policies that are online. And some of them are challenging in terms of just how long they are. Some of them are very legally based, you know, talking about articles, and you know they go into 22.1.3 in terms of the paragraphs they're talking about. And I believe that the average reading age of an adult in the UK is around 9 at the moment. And so there's many adults that would not necessarily understand privacy policies. And when you then translate that to children, you know, how accessible is the information that you're trying to be transparent with people to individuals who are visiting your website? So have a really challenging yourself to think, would a child visiting my website understand what I'm doing with data? How can I make that more understandable for them? And it's, you know, something that we've worked on with a couple of charities who work with children directly, that they have 2 versions, one that's more child friendly, And again, it's just thinking through the way things are phrased, the opportunities to share transparency information. So maybe there's sort of more bite-sized chunks that you could put in place that make it easier to read, or pop up at the point that you might be collecting or sharing information, that it explains it in terms that are very simple. But I think for many organisations, that privacy notice will be a challenge and almost step one to consider.
And just to put that into a bit of context, if you were to look at our privacy policy, I recently run it through a score which used something that's called the Flesch-Kincaid formula, which rates the readability of your privacy policy. And at the moment, our current one reads at a level of a university student. So for us, or university education, so for us, we will be writing a child-friendly privacy policy, because based on what Regina's just said, our existing policy, which meets all of the criteria of the GDPR, is too high an age for a child. So we now need to take a step back and look at that and apply what we have done to some of our clients and produce a much more child-friendly privacy policy. So it's well worth running your existing policy through the score. If anyone's interested in that, I can send you the link about how to assess your existing privacy policy. But like I said, we've done it for us, and we will be changing the policy. Okay, I can see some of you are interested, so I'll send you that link.
Excellent. More issues then to consider and to run through is your default settings. So are they currently set at the highest privacy settings? So if somebody just visits your website or engages with any services that you're offering online, are you automatically tracking them? And this can be as simple as cookies. So, and there are requirements that you should have consent in place for cookies, but, have you got it so that the location of the individual is not necessarily tracked? Have you got it so that they are protected? And I think when you then look at some of the, if we think of some of the apps that are out there, it's about, I think Facebook, Snapchat probably is more appealing to children. I think Facebook is probably more aimed at my age group now. And it's about making sure that if they're using those apps, the default setting isn't that it's sharing their location, that's not publicly available, actually that it's not tracking them at all, it doesn't know where their location is, that's set to off. And then if the child does choose to actually change that, so they want people to know where they are, making it really clear that this is what the implication of that is. So if you change it and show your friends, as long as you know who your friends are, that's probably not too much of a risk, because you're then seeing, are they close to you, etc. But actually make that public, what are the risks then? Making sure that that's explained to a child in a way that's not terrifying, but also lets them understand the implication of making their status and their where they are in the world or in the town available publicly is potentially risky to them. And subsequently, if they have changed it, the next time they log on, it has defaulted back to not being available, so that protection of, the child not necessarily realizing or leaving something on where they didn't mean to, then you're defaulting to helping them protect themselves as much as possible. Linked to that then is obviously the geolocation. So the two are quite linked to, the fact that, if you're tracking individuals as well, the children, where they're going, what they're doing, and the potential that could be intrusion on their privacy. So the default settings, you need to really review those as a whole in all the different aspects of your service and look at making sure that they are set to the highest levels of privacy, and that it's very clear to the child as to what the implications of making any changes are, and then making sure that it reverts after a not too long period of time to the default high settings, so that they are automatically protected. So what I'll try and just sort of leave you with now as we come to the end of the webinar is sort of some of the questions to take back and consider amongst your teams or within your organisation, to see where you might be able to start addressing some of the issues here. So obviously step one is really to think about have you thought about whether this affects the services that you're offering online? I think, as Kellie outlined, it's potentially going to be the vast majority of businesses. I think if you've got a pure marketing, this is what we do and that's it, that's very unlikely. But the second you're stepping into educational resources or services that people can access online, for the most part, there's potential that certainly older children may be interested. So then thinking about the age range it could apply to, and there's again, the ICO have got some quite helpful resources that I think they've linked from other UK departments around how children develop over time, what the age brackets are, how you need to explain information to them, what the likelihood of the concerns and issues might be for each age group. So thinking through, it's looking very much at the developmental stages of a child, so sort of primary, and then sort of that sort of pre-primary, sorry, sort of 0 to 4, and then moving up beyond that through various sort of brackets that again can be really helpful to you as you think about which of these brackets are likely to age brackets are likely to access our services, and then how can we appropriately engage and communicate with them. Is there anything that jumps out as an immediate area of concern for you, in terms of either the services that you're offering that maybe you hadn't thought about that could be part of this, or things that that are routine that are happening that actually you need to change so that it's in line with the code? Have you done anything already? Obviously, if you weren't aware of it prior to this, and it's potentially likely to be nothing, but has anything in your organisation happened? If anybody else has been aware of it, so has anything already been done? And then what's going to be your priority? So work out a list of, where are the priority areas to be addressed? What, maybe where are some of the easier aspects? But there will be an order, so you might not necessarily be able to review and update your privacy policy to encompass some of the new measures, but you might be able to look at some of the existing language and think about how that could be simplified or made easier to understand or broken down. So there could be sort of stepped measures that you look to take as we sort of come into the last sort of 3 months. So do have a look at your services, establish if the code applies, have a look at your current data protection practices. So are you doing data protection impact assessments where there's new data processing or a change to existing data processing, or you want to do something different with the data that you hold? Are you undertaking those data protection impact assessments? Are you at least doing the screening form? And particularly, again, if you are working with children, this is something that would hopefully be part of your routine processes anyway. Look, as I said, at your privacy notices. How are they phrased? Could they be improved in any way? Are they reflective of what you do if you haven't reviewed them for a while? And then think about running them through. Kellie's popped the link into the chat for you so that you can then see sort of what the level is and think about whether or not you're comfortable with that, and again how potentially it could be simplified, broken down, or made more engaging. And then put that into a plan for priority action so that you've got the key aspects being dealt with. Again, think about, have you got anything that you're doing already? So think about engaging if you've got an external support from your web developers. If you're not aware of the types of cookies or tracking that might be happening on your website, or the link to the services that could be of interest to children, check with them, do an audit, understand what it is that's in place, and then set those default settings to the highest privacy setting that you can. Think about ways that if you need to, you can identify the ages of individuals visiting or using your services. Again, if that's something that you need to do, then make sure that that's in place. If it's not, then you need to think about ensuring that everybody is accessing the website or your service or the products that you're offering, that they then are treated equally, but so that it's at the protection of the child. So then the impact on other information that you might have available could be impacted. So those really apply to the things like the geolocation, nudge techniques, where you might be trying to encourage people to sign up for a newsletter or share more information with you. If the language is very sort of phrased in a way that's very encouraging and emphasizing the benefits over the potential pitfalls, you need to just be aware of the fact that that could be considered to be nudge techniques. And then I think probably the greater challenge will be for organizations where there are going to be multiple age ranges accessing services. If you've got the difference between older adults, sort of 16 to 18, 10 to 12-year-olds, it's potentially going to be quite different in the way that you interact with them, the way that you need to explain information to them, whether or not they need to engage with their parents around asking for more information. And again, the ICO have got in their children's code hub some really good examples of how you might do this. Look at how you can do that effectively within the user experience without making it overly complex. It needs to be simple, and it needs to be said in the best interests of the child. So now it's been a slightly longer session in terms of us talking this time, but I think there's quite a lot of information to convey and to get across within this sort of introduction to the children's code. So if you have any questions now, then please do pop them into the chat box.
I can see some typing going on,
Yes.
so we'll give you a moment or two to ask the questions, and then I hope that everyone that's joined or who is listening after the live recording has found this to be useful. I would say if you are listening to this and you're not at the live event, do contact us via email with your questions. We're more than happy. That's the point there about the details about opting in or out of NHS Digital is really interesting. And actually, it's not even reliant on consent, to be honest. It's a ministerial directive. But I'm glad that we've been able to share the difference between what we define as a child and what we define as consent of a child. What I would say is that obviously what Regina and I have gone through is quite a lot in the last 40 minutes. If you do have questions, or after this you think, oh, there is something, always feel free to contact us. We're always happy to have that chat. And just a few things from us before we wind up. We have a range of courses that are running in July. The dates are now available on the slide in front of you. As Regina said, we've got a whole range of courses from marketing, subject access request. Our new course, which we're launching this month, is cookie compliance. And obviously, if you do need to conduct a data protection impact assessment, we do have a course that could support you with that. We can help you. Obviously, if you do need support with a DPIA, whatever that looks like, we're always happy to have a conversation about what our support could look like. We do regularly write privacy policies, and we can write them an adult version as well as a child-friendly version. Regina's had some really good feedback on the child-friendly privacy policies she's written. And we do offer expert hours if all you need is a friend to call and you need half an hour of support. We have a catalogue, which you are more than welcome to download from our website, which has a whole list of our product range and services. And here are all of our socials. I would say that, we do a monthly webinar. We have lots of fun, free materials on our website through blogs, through previous webinars, through infographics. We're quite prolific on social media. So do follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our YouTube channel, or email us at the email address. And, I'm sure Regina will agree. It's been really nice to have you here today. I want to thank you for your attention because it is intense. And I really hope that what we've presented to you has been practical, but also gives you a clear next step. So I can see that we've had some really nice feedback. So I really appreciate that. If there are no other questions, then please let us know.
So I'm just checking there in terms of, there's a question around a helpline or first contact point to start when the protection is in place. So I just wanted to check whether that was to us or to the ICO. If it's the ICO, the ICO's helpline, if you've got any sort of direct queries, you can either use their chat box. If you want to get in touch with us, then our telephone number's on our website. You're absolutely welcome to give us a call there, or as Kelly said, drop us an email if you've got sort of queries once you've had a look and you think actually we'd like a little bit more or a little review. Then do let us know. Does that answer your question? Brilliant.
Perfect. Right. Well, we are just on the nose of 45 minutes. So we'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for joining Regina and myself today. And I hope to see you again on a future webinar. So thank you.